Officer Ryan Caldwell snapped handcuffs onto a black woman in a cream silk dress one sunny afternoon on a public street in Harrington, Georgia, right in front of a dozen people whose phones were already recording. He told the crowd the car was stolen. He said it loudly, with the practiced confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything he did while wearing that badge. He was wrong about everything, and he was about to find out in the worst way a man like him can find out. Not in private, not quietly, not with any of the dignity he had decided she didn't deserve. The woman's name was Nia Parker Barnes. She was in her 40s, days away from her wedding, and soon to be sworn in as a Superior Court judge in the same courthouse, in the same building, sitting in the same chair that had belonged to the family whose name Caldwell carried into his own home every single night. He didn't know any of that. He saw a black woman in a vintage Jaguar on a sunny afternoon in a neighborhood that his father-in-law had spent years deciding who belonged in and who didn't. He made a decision in seconds. He dismissed her warning. He put on the cuffs. He smirked. That smirk is what this story is about. Before we go any further, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's get into it. The car was a vintage Jaguar E-Type in British racing green, and it was the most beautiful thing on Cypress Avenue that sunny afternoon. Chrome grille catching the sun like a signal mirror, cream leather interior that smelled of lanolin and thyme, and the specific care that someone gives to a thing they love deeply and deliberately. It moved through the streets of Harrington's Riverside neighborhood with the low, unhurried authority of a car that had nothing to prove and knew it. Nia Parker Barnes was driving it to her final wedding dress fitting. She had polished it herself that morning. Soft cloth, slow circles, hood first, and working outward. And the British racing green had that deep liquid luster that only comes from doing the work by hand. Not from a machine, not from a shop, but from a person who understands that some things are worth the time they take. She was thinking about her father when she saw the red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Not racing, not urgent. A single casual pulse from a patrol car that had been moving alongside her for several blocks, keeping pace, watching. The kind of following that isn't technically following because there's no law against it. The kind that tells you everything about what's coming before a single word has been said. Nia's hand settled on the steering wheel. Her breathing stayed even. Her heart did not race. She had been black in America for her entire life, and her father had been a civil rights attorney for decades, and she had spent years as a prosecutor. And she had learned the way you learn things that are taught to you before you understand why you need to know them. Exactly what the next several minutes were going to require of her. She pulled the Jaguar to the curb on Cypress Avenue, turned the engine off. The silence was immediate and heavy. She watched in the side mirror as Officer Ryan Caldwell got out of his patrol car. He was broad across the shoulders with a military-style haircut that was a fraction too severe for the softness of his face. The cut of a man who sees himself one way and has arranged his appearance to match the image. He walked toward her with the slow, weight-forward stride of someone who has already decided before he reaches the window that he is the most important person in this conversation. His right hand rested near his holster, not on it, near it, a casual reminder of what he was carrying and what that meant. He was around 35, and he had the particular settled confidence of a man who had done this many times before and had never once had to answer for it. She would learn in a few hours that he was the son-in-law of the man whose bench she was about to inherit. She didn't know that yet. She knew the hand near the holster. She knew the walk. She knew what came next. What she couldn't have known sitting in her father's car in her silk dress, the sun warm through the windshield, was that what was about to happen on this curb was not random. The phone call that triggered it had been made earlier that day. The false report had already been filed. The only variable remaining was whether she would react the way they expected her to react. If she did, the matter would be resolved quietly and quickly, and she would spend the days ahead too shaken and too humiliated to walk into that courtroom without flinching. They had never met Elijah Parker's daughter. They were about to. Her father had bought the Jaguar the year she was born, the same year he passed the Georgia bar exam on his third attempt. After the first two were followed by rejection letters from firms that didn't explain themselves because they didn't feel they needed to. He called the car his proof of arrival, not proof of wealth, not proof of success, proof of arrival. The specific, hard-won right to exist in a space that was always trying to convince you that you didn't. He polished it every Saturday morning of Nia's childhood, and she had stood beside him in the carriage house with her own cloth, working the passenger door in small circles the way he showed her while he talked, not lectured, talked, about the cases he was fighting, about the clients who trusted him with the worst moments of their lives, about the way the law was a weapon that could be used for justice or for oppression. And the only question that mattered was whose hands were holding it right now and what you were going to do about that. He died years ago. A heart that quit without warning on an ordinary evening, which was the kind of ending he would have objected to on procedural grounds. He left her the Jaguar, his law books, and a locked metal filing cabinet in his study. She knew about the law books immediately. The lawyer mentioned the filing cabinet during the reading of the will, and she had looked at it in the study afterward, ran her hand over the cold metal, and left it locked for some time. She wasn't ready for what was inside it. She had understood, even without opening it, that it contained something that would ask something of her. She was a prosecutor with years of experience and a record that made the Harrington County DA's office look better than it probably deserved. She was days from marrying Matthew Barnes, who taught AP Civics at Riverside High School and had the steadiest temperament of anyone she had ever known. A man who could sit at the kitchen table late at night while she worked through a case file and simply be there, quiet, present, without needing the silence to be filled. She had met him at a fundraiser for the public defender's office. He had been the only person in the room who wasn't a lawyer. And that was immediately apparent and immediately appealing. Some time ago, she had been appointed to the Superior Court bench, taking the seat of the retiring Judge Harlan Whitaker, a man who had been there for years and whose courtroom her father had once described with the flat precision of a man who had lost cases he should have won as a room built to lose in. Whitaker had not called to congratulate her, had not written, had offered nothing. No transition meeting, no professional courtesy, no acknowledgement that this was a thing that was happening. His chambers had gone cold and silent the day her appointment was announced. And that silence told her something more useful than any congratulatory call would have. It told her he was afraid of what she was going to find. When she started looking, she was thinking about all of this: her father's voice in the carriage house, the weight of what soon would feel like, the particular quality of Whitaker's silence. When Caldwell reached her window, she had the window down a few inches before he arrived, enough to talk through, not enough to be reached. He looked at the car first, not at her, at the car. His pale eyes moved over the chrome, the paint, the cream leather of the passenger seat visible through the glass, and something shifted in them. It wasn't admiration. It was the specific skepticism of a man who has decided that something doesn't add up. And the thing that didn't add up was the person behind the wheel. A look that said, "This doesn't belong to you." Then he looked at her. License and registration. Not a question, not preceded by a reason for the stop, just the command, flat and practiced. She had them ready in the center console front pocket, specific place, easy access. She passed them through the gap with 2 fingers. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. Steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was a structure you built on top of whatever was actually moving inside you. And you maintained it through discipline and through knowing what the next hour was going to require. He took the documents without looking at her name, looked at the car again. "Nice car," he said. The way he said it was not a compliment. He let the sentence sit in the air incomplete, fully intended. "It was my father's," she said. "Is there a reason for the stop, officer?" He didn't answer. He gave her a brief assessing look, the look of a man who hasn't been asked that question before by someone who actually expects an answer, and walked back to his patrol car with her documents in his hand. She counted her breaths. 4 and 4, hold 4, out. And she watched the people on the sidewalk. A woman with a stroller had paused at the corner. 3 teenagers had stopped, their phones coming up slowly, not recording yet, but getting ready the way you get ready when you've seen this before and you know what it usually becomes. A young man in a gray jacket at the bus stop was watching Caldwell's car in the mirror. His phone was already out. After some time, Caldwell came back. His walk was different now, slower, more settled into itself, the weight of a man who has found what he was looking for and is about to use it. He walked to the front of the Jaguar, then to the side, then to her door, and he tapped on the glass with 1 finger. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." "On what basis, officer?" He didn't answer. A small smile at the corner of his mouth. He raised his voice now, not for her, for the sidewalk. "This vehicle was reported stolen this morning. I need you to step out now." The Jaguar had not left the carriage house in days. She had polished it herself that morning. The registration was in her name. The title was in her name. She had driven it to the courthouse recently. She looked at him. He looked back with the absolute practiced certainty of a man who has told this particular lie before and had it accepted. He was not embarrassed by it. He was not uncertain. He had the settled confidence of someone who knows that the machine he serves will accept his word over whoever is sitting in the car. "Officer," she said clearly, voice carrying for the phones that were rising on the sidewalk, "my name is Nia Parker Barnes. I am a licensed Georgia attorney and a sitting prosecutor with the Harrington County DA's office. This vehicle is registered in my name. I have presented valid documentation. I'm requesting that you verify the vehicle title before taking any further action." Caldwell looked at her. His expression didn't change. He tilted his head slightly the way a man tilts his head when he's been told something he finds mildly amusing. "Lady," he said, "plenty of people carry a bar card. Doesn't mean the car is yours." He unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around." She turned. She put her hands behind her back. The cuffs went on too tight. She felt it immediately. The metal biting into the bones of her wrists, the specific pressure of someone who was not being careless. She cataloged it, filed it, noted the degree of force, noted the fact that there would be marks by morning. From the bus stop, Tyler Donovan was recording. He had been recording since Caldwell got out of the patrol car. He had the badge number, the plate, the name Caldwell in block letters. And now he had the cuffs and the silk dress and the expression on Nia's face, which was perfectly, entirely, frighteningly calm, and the voices starting up on the sidewalk. "That's not right." She gave him everything he asked for. "Lady said she's a lawyer." Caldwell turned to the sidewalk with his arm extended. "Nothing to see here? Step back." He said it like a man who has never once considered the possibility that the people watching him have the right to watch. The Jaguar was impounded. Nia placed in the back of the patrol car. She watched through the rear window as the tow truck hooked up her father's car. The British racing green catching the afternoon light one last time before it was pulled forward and away. And she felt something move through her chest that she did not allow to reach her face. "You get a few minutes for what this feels like," she told herself. "Then you get to work." The Jackson Street precinct was everything a police station is designed to be and nothing more. Fluorescent lights at the frequency that makes you feel like you've been somewhere longer than you have. Linoleum floors in a beige that had never been chosen by anyone who cared. The smell of industrial disinfectant. And beneath it, something that was not quite despair, but was in the same neighborhood. The accumulated weight of everyone who had sat in those plastic chairs and waited to find out what the machine would do with them. Desk Sergeant Powell was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, with the tired, expert face of someone who had stopped seeing people and started seeing paperwork years ago. He looked up when Caldwell brought her in. His eyes moved over the silk dress, the cuffs, the level set of her jaw, and he made no visible assessment. He reached for the intake form. "What you got?" "Grand theft auto," Caldwell said, with the particular note in his voice of a man setting something down with satisfaction. "Caught her in a vintage Jag on Cypress. Vehicle reported stolen this morning." Powell took the paperwork without looking at it, looked at Nia. She looked back at him. Her voice was measured and clear. "Sergeant, I need to inform you that your officer has made a serious error. That vehicle is registered in my name. I am a licensed Georgia attorney and an officer of this court. My name is Nia Parker Barnes, and I'm requesting access to legal representation." Powell looked at Caldwell. Caldwell shrugged. One shoulder, the body language of a man who has heard all of this before and has never once had to adjust his position because of it. "She's been saying that the whole time, Sarge. Everybody's got a story." Powell looked back at Nia. He sighed the theatrical sigh of a man performing patience. "You'll get your phone call," he said, after processing. The processing was precise and deliberate. Fingerprints, mugshot, earrings removed, shoes taken, her simple gold hoops, her mother's graduation gift dropped into a plastic bag. The mugshot flash was bright and final. Through all of it, she was silent. She was building a timeline in her mind. Every name, every piece of property removed, every word said with the same methodical attention she brought to preparing a case for trial. Because that was what this was. She was placed in a holding cell on the east corridor. The guard who locked the door didn't look at her. The bolt slid home with a sound that was heavier than she had expected. Not loud, just heavy with the finality of something that has been done many times before to many different people and means the same thing every time. The cell was concrete and cold. Metal bench, toilet, a polished metal surface above it that functioned as a mirror. She sat on the bench and felt the cold through the silk. She looked at her reflection in the metal. She gave herself a few minutes. She had said a few minutes in the patrol car, and she meant it, not as a coping mechanism, not as a way of managing grief, but as a deliberate, conscious act. Her father had told her something once that she had carried for years. You are allowed to be a person, Nia. You are not allowed to let being a person stop you from doing the work. Feel it, then move. So she sat in her silk dress with the handcuff marks on her wrists, and she let herself feel it, the humiliation of it, the weight of being processed like a number, a file, a body the machine had swallowed. The helplessness of knowing exactly what was happening and exactly why it was wrong, and not being able to access any remedy because the bolt was in the lock and the guard wasn't looking. She felt it, all of it, the full weight of it. When the minutes were up, she took one breath, then another. What remained was something clear and cold and directional. Not anger, not fear, something more useful than either. The victim was done. The prosecutor had work to do. One call. She had been telling clients this for years. You get one call, use it correctly. She had also told them the station monitors everything. Plan what you say before you pick up the phone. She called Matthew. Not her attorney, not the DA's office. A call to your fiancé reads as personal. It reads as scared, as a plea for comfort. She was going to use their assumptions against them. 3 rings. Nia. His voice was immediate, warm, and underneath it, the particular quality of a man who had been mildly worried and is relieved to hear the line connect. You missed the fitting. I was about to... Matthew, she said, I need you to listen carefully. Don't speak until I'm done. A pause. She heard him go still. He knew this voice. She had used it once before, calling him from a courthouse parking lot after losing a case she should have won, and he had listened then too, without interrupting, without filling the silence with himself. I'm at the Jackson Street precinct, she said. I've been arrested. The officer's name is Ryan Caldwell, badge number 2247. I've been charged with grand theft auto. The charge is false. I need you to call David Reynolds and tell him everything I've told you. The badge number, the precinct, the charge. Tell him to come now. She heard Matthew adjust, not panic, but a rapid reconfiguration of the next several hours. Okay, he said. I'm calling him right now. Nia, one more thing, she said. My father's study, the locked filing cabinet behind the left bookshelf. The key is taped to the bottom of the second drawer of his desk. Get the files, Matthew, all of them. Bring them to David's office. A silence. The files, he repeated. His voice had gone quiet and more serious, the voice of a man who has just understood that the situation is significantly larger than he initially measured. All of them, she said. And Matthew. The guard appeared at the bars. Time's up. She looked at the guard, back at the phone. I love you, she said, and the guard reached past her and ended the call. She sat back on the bench. The first move had been made. The pieces were in motion. The machine had swallowed her, and it had done so confident in what it was. It didn't know what she was carrying. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps quick and purposeful, leather expensive, the walk of someone moving through an institutional space on his own terms. She had learned a long time ago to read people from the sound of how they move through difficult places. David Reynolds appeared at the cell door, compact, close-cropped gray at the temples, a face that never quite arrived at a readable expression, dark charcoal suit. He had not put it on in a hurry. Behind him was Sergeant Powell, looking considerably less comfortable than he had at intake. And behind Powell, Matthew, his eyes finding hers through the bars and moving through love and rage and a helplessness he was actively suppressing, jaw tight, hands loose at his sides, doing what she had asked him to do, which was not make it worse. David did not look at Nia first. He looked at Sergeant Powell. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room more completely than a raised voice would. You are currently holding a sitting member of the Harrington County Prosecutor's Office and a judge-elect to the Superior Court on a stolen vehicle report that will not survive 30 seconds of legal scrutiny. You have held her without timely access to counsel. You have impounded her personal property without legitimate cause. Every minute she remains in this cell, the personal liability exposure for you, for Officer Caldwell, and for this city compounds at a rate I assure you neither of you is calculated correctly. So you are going to open this door right now, and we are going to complete the paperwork, and then I'm going to spend the next several weeks ensuring that what happened today has every consequence it deserves. Powell's face went through several things quickly. He looked at David. He looked at Nia sitting calm and still on the cold bench in her ruined silk dress. He looked at the door. He fumbled for his keys. The door opened. The release was graceless. Paperwork, a plastic bag, no apology offered, none expected. Nia put her earrings back in. The gold was cold. Matthew took her hand gently and stopped when his thumb found the marks on her wrists, the swollen, bruised skin, the welts the cuffs had left. He said nothing. His jaw tightened once, and then he let it go, and she felt him make the decision not to give this place the satisfaction of his reaction. They walked out into the cool evening. The air was sharp and clean in the way that outside air always is after you've been somewhere bad, and Nia stopped on the precinct steps for a moment and breathed it in. "The charge will be dropped by morning," David said, walking toward his car. "I'll file tonight." "That's not enough," Nia said. He looked at her. "Dropping the charge is the quiet resolution," she said. "It's what they want. Make the problem go away. Let me be relieved. It's over. And I walk into that courtroom soon, damaged and grateful and too careful to do what I came to do." She got into the back of David's car. Matthew slid in beside her. "I want Caldwell's badge. I want to know who filed that report and why they felt protected enough to do it in broad daylight. And I want to pull on that thread until I find out exactly how deep it runs." David was quiet, looking at her in the rearview mirror. "Then we need to start tonight," he said, and changed direction. Some time passed in silence. Then Matthew spoke. His voice was careful and quiet the way he spoke in the classroom when he had just said something he needed the room to sit with. "The name on the badge," he said. "Caldwell." Nia was quiet. "Brian Caldwell." Matthew said it. She had seen it the moment the officer reached her window. She had logged it and set it aside because in the moment she had needed to focus on her hands and her breathing and the record she was building. She had sat with the implication in the holding cell during her few minutes. She had arrived at a conclusion that she did not want to be right about, but knew she was. Harlan Whitaker's daughter. She had married a man named Brian Caldwell years ago. It was in the courthouse newsletter. She paused. "I read it at the time." The car was quiet. The words settled into the silence with the specific weight of something that reorders everything you thought you were looking at. David's hands were steady on the wheel. Matthew had gone very still beside her. It was not a random stop. It was a message. Harlan Whitaker had spent years on that bench and had used it the way her father had always said it was being used, as a tool for maintaining a particular order, for protecting the officers who kept that order, for ensuring that the cases brought before him arrived at outcomes that served the people who had installed him and sustained him. He had not congratulated her appointment. He had gone cold and silent. And then his son-in-law had been sent with a false report filed from somewhere close at a specific time with a specific target to deliver a message clear enough that it didn't need a word of explanation. "Back down. We were here before you. We will be here after you." Nobody in the car spoke for a long moment. The city moved past the windows, streetlights, a gas station, a woman walking a dog on the far sidewalk. The ordinary evening of a city that didn't yet know what had been set in motion inside it. "They miscalculated," Nia said. Her voice was quiet, not angry. "Certain. They thought they were dealing with someone who would want everything to go smoothly," she said. "Someone who would be grateful to have the charge dropped. Someone who would decide that the days before her swearing in was not the moment to make enemies." She looked out the window. They didn't know about the files. Matthew took her hand. David put on his turn signal. "Ellis Patton," he said. It was not a question. "Ellis Patton," she confirmed. Judge Ellis Patton lived in a craftsman bungalow on a street lined with oak trees planted decades ago, trees that had grown into the kind of canopy that makes an entire block feel like a different century. The house was modest and immaculate, white trim, dark shutters, a covered porch with 2 chairs on it that had held a great many serious conversations and looked capable of holding more. He was elderly. He had been the first black Superior Court judge in Harrington County, appointed after a legal career that had required, as he once put it, not just excellence, but the willingness to be excellent in rooms that were working very hard to convince you that you didn't belong. He had retired years ago. The legal community had never quite figured out how to move on without him. He was still consulted, still sought out, still the person you called when the situation required not just competence, but wisdom. And wisdom in Harrington meant Ellis Patton. The lights were on when they pulled up. Before Matthew could reach the door, it opened. Patton stood in the doorway and looked at them. He was a small, slender man who moved carefully and precisely, with eyes that took in everything and shared most of nothing. He looked at Nia the way a doctor looks at a patient, not with pity, but with the focused attention of someone determining exactly what has happened and what it requires. His gaze moved to her wrists, stayed there a moment. He nodded once, slow. "I heard," he said. His voice was a dry, quiet baritone, the voice of a man who has spent decades choosing his words. "Come inside." He led them to his study. Old paper, leather, the ghost of pipe tobacco from years ago. The walls were working books, broken spines, paper markers, pencil in the margins, a desk organized with the precision of a man who knows where everything is and has always known. And in the corner, a locked filing cabinet that she noticed immediately because it was the only thing in the room that was locked. He poured 3 glasses of water, handed one to Nia first. "Drink," he said. It was an order. She drank. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Don't skip anything." She told him the way she told cases, linear, precise, without editorializing, because the facts were the argument, and they didn't need her feelings added to them to be damning. The stop, the wait, Caldwell's voice carrying to the sidewalk, the false report, the line he'd said after she identified herself as a lawyer, the processing, the holding cell, the name on the badge. When she finished, the room was quiet. Patton sat with his fingertips pressed together in front of him and looked at the middle distance. He stayed like that for some time. "Brian Caldwell," he said, the way you say a name that is simultaneously unsurprising and enraging. "I've been watching that young man since he joined the force. He came with a recommendation from Harlan Whitaker's office. I thought at the time it was simple nepotism." He paused. It was more than that. He stood and walked to the filing cabinet, a small brass key from his watch chain. He removed a folder that was thick and old, its edges worn soft with handling. The tab label was in neat block letters, Whitaker. He set it on the desk in front of them. "I started this when Whitaker was still a prosecutor, and I was still on the bench," he said. "I began to notice patterns in the cases he brought, patterns in what evidence was presented and what wasn't, whose testimony was considered reliable and whose wasn't. He built his career on relationships with officers who would provide testimony that supported his theory regardless of what the evidence actually showed. When he moved to the bench, the protection ran both directions. His officers got favorable rulings and dismissed complaints. He got reliable witnesses in a courtroom that functioned exactly as intended. He opened the folder. "Brian Caldwell has multiple use-of-force complaints, everyone dismissed by the same internal review board chaired during that entire period by a man whose son served under the protection of officers connected to Whitaker's network, several civil suits for wrongful stops and improper searches, all settled quietly by the city." He looked at Nia directly. In every single case, the complainant was a person of color in a vehicle the officer decided they had no business driving, a new SUV, a restored truck, a late-model Cadillac. He closed the folder gently. "Your father's Jaguar was not the first. It was simply the first time they chose someone who could fight back on their level." The room was quiet again. "There's more," Patton said. He produced a single sheet of paper, a list of names in 2 columns. The officers who worked consistently with Caldwell, no formal organization, no name, no insignia, just loyalty and cover. They lose body cam footage at far more than the department average. Complaint investigations involving any of them are routed to the same 2 reviewers who have never sustained a single finding against any of them. David had his pen out. This is RICO territory. It is, Patton agreed. But the local DA will not touch it. Kevin Franklin has been running on police union endorsements since his first election. Moving against Whitaker's network would end his career, and he knows it. Then we go above him, Nia said. She had been listening without speaking for some time, which was what she always did when someone who knew more than her was talking, and she had been building quietly the architecture of what came next. She could see it now. She could see where the pieces connected. U.S. Attorney's Office, David said. Public integrity, pattern and practice case, potentially conspiracy. We need more than old files, Nia said. We need something current, something that ties Caldwell's actions today directly to the larger structure. Something that shows intent, not just pattern. She paused. We need the source of that stolen vehicle report. They moved to David's office on the 7th floor of the Meridian Plaza downtown. Quiet at this hour, the particular silence of a building that is emptied out after hours. The main conference room had a long mahogany table, and David's paralegal, Paula, was already there with a laptop and the slightly over-caffeinated focus of someone who had been called and understood that the night was going to be long. Matthew unboxed the files. He had retrieved them from Elijah Parker's study exactly as described, the key taped under the second drawer, the cabinet behind the left bookshelf, and he had brought everything. 2 boxes of folders, each organized in his father-in-law's handwriting, with the meticulous attention of a man who had spent decades believing that the documentation would eventually matter, that the record would eventually be used, that the day would come when someone opened these boxes and found inside them what the system had refused to acknowledge. Tonight was that day. Matthew opened the first box and began building a timeline at one end of the table, legal pad, markers, incident types across the other. Working with the focused, careful attention he brought to primary source documents in the classroom. The names of officers, judges, dismissed complaints, settled lawsuits forming a grid that told the story clearly enough to show a jury without explanation. Patton sat in the corner chair with a glass of water and watched. Occasionally he said something that saved them time. What emerged over the next hours was a machine that had been running for decades, not crude, not obvious. It had relied on relationships and paperwork and the institutional amnesia that develops when the same people review the same situations year after year and always arrive at the same conclusion. Whitaker had not created it from nothing. He had found a structure already disposed toward a certain kind of order and had made himself indispensable to its maintenance. In return, the structure had protected him. Later, Paula looked up from her screen. "The stolen vehicle report," she said. Everyone looked at her. Called into non-emergency dispatch earlier this afternoon, minutes before the traffic stop. The number is registered to a cell phone. She paused one beat. The account holder is Dana Callahan. The room was quiet. Dana Callahan was Brian Caldwell's wife. She was also Harlan Whitaker's daughter. The stolen vehicle report had been filed by the sitting judge's own daughter minutes before her husband pulled Nia over on Cypress Avenue. This was not a rogue cop on a power trip. This was coordinated, planned that morning, executed that afternoon with a false police report as the mechanism, Brian Caldwell as the instrument, and Harlan Whitaker as the protection that made both of them feel safe enough to do it in broad daylight to a judge-elect with phones recording on the sidewalk. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then David said quietly, "That converts the civil rights violation into conspiracy, filing a false police report to facilitate the wrongful arrest of a specific individual with the motive of intimidating her from assuming public office." He looked at the ceiling. "That's federal, multiple counts." "We still need a direct witness," Nia said. "Someone who can put Whitaker's knowledge of the plan on the record. The phone record shows Dana Callahan made the call. It doesn't prove Whitaker knew." Patton set down his glass. "Then we find one," he said. The text arrived on David's phone later that night, an unknown number, 14 words. "I work for Judge Whitaker. I know what happened today. I want to talk." David showed it to Nia. She read it once. "Meet them," she said. He texted back a time and a place, the Daily Grind on Maple Street, early the next morning before the courthouse crowd. He didn't give a name. Early the next morning, Nia and David were in the back booth when the door opened and a young woman came in. She was in her 20s with the look of someone who had spent the night making a decision and was committed to it and frightened by what that meant. She was wearing courthouse staff clothes, professional enough for the building, forgettable enough not to be noticed. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the coffee David had ordered and spoke in a low, quick voice. Her name was Rachel Bloom. She had been Judge Whitaker's judicial clerk for some time. She had been writing things down for months, a personal journal, nothing on courthouse equipment, just dates and quotes and overheard conversations, since she had understood gradually and with increasing clarity what the chambers she was working in actually were. She had been in Whitaker's outer office the previous morning. Dana Callahan had come in to see her father. Not unusual. She came in often and had been on her phone without lowering her voice. She had said clearly and distinctly, "Brian's going to make sure she gets the message before she even gets to walk in the door. Daddy will sort out whatever needs sorting afterward." She had laughed when she said it, the casual laugh of someone discussing a foregone conclusion. Laughed when Rachel slid her journal across the table. Months of entries. Nia opened it and read several pages without expression. Then she closed it and looked at Rachel. "You understand what testifying to this means," Nia said. Rachel's hands tightened on the cup. "I have a brother," she said, "serving years on a conviction from Whitaker's courtroom. I've been looking at the case file for some time. The arresting officer was in Caldwell's network. The testimony had inconsistencies that were never addressed." She looked at Nia steadily. "I'm not doing this because I'm brave. I'm doing it because it's the only thing I can do." Nia looked at her for a moment. "If you cooperate formally, David's office files for witness protection with the U.S. attorney before anything else. Your employer is notified that you are a cooperating witness in a federal investigation, which means touching you becomes a federal crime, and your brother's case goes to independent review." She paused. "I give you my word." A silence. The coffee shop was quiet around them. "Okay," Rachel said, then again, more settled. "Okay." By morning, they were back at David's office. Matthew had been there all night, having declined to go home when Nia suggested it. He had slept a little in a waiting room chair and was on his second coffee and had covered one end of the conference table in a timeline that made decades of documented misconduct visible in a single glance. The kind of clarity that takes a history teacher to produce, the translation of accumulated facts into a form that makes the pattern impossible to look away from. Patton looked at it for some time when he arrived. "Your father was a teacher," he said to Matthew. "High school civics." Patton nodded slowly. "He was already a lawyer," he said. "He just didn't know it yet." David had spent part of the night on calls. People he didn't name, favors discussed in the elliptical language of professionals who understand that specificity and obligation should remain separate for as long as possible. By morning, he had a preliminary meeting scheduled with the U.S. Attorney's Office for later that same morning. Nia spent the hour between in David's office constructing what she thought of as the load-bearing argument, the specific set of facts that could not be explained away, that could not be attributed to error or carelessness, that required a deliberate and organized structure of corruption to produce. 3 facts formed the core. Dana Callahan's phone record placing the false report minutes before the stop, Caldwell's documented history of targeting people of color in premium vehicles with every complaint dismissed by the same reviewers, and Rachel Bloom's direct testimony of Dana Callahan stating in Whitaker's chambers that the arrest was coordinated and that Whitaker would handle the aftermath. Those 3 facts together were not everything, but they were the frame, and the Patton and Parker files were the filling. Tyler Donovan's footage had reached hundreds of thousands of views overnight. Several local stations had reached out to David's office. He had responded to none of them. The story broke on their timeline, not a reporter's. Nia looked out the window at Harrington waking up in the morning light, days until her wedding, soon until the swearing in. The filing cabinet was open on the conference table, and the documents inside it were already changing what the next several months were going to look like for this city, for this courthouse, for a great many people who were confident they were safe. They had made the mistake that concentrated power always eventually makes. They had assumed that the people they were harming weren't documenting, weren't watching, weren't waiting for the right moment. Elijah Parker had been watching for decades. His daughter had the files, and now she had a federal appointment the following morning. Assistant U.S. Attorney Susan Vance was direct in the way that people who handle complex cases become direct out of necessity and not easily moved. She listened without interrupting, professional, and when they finished, she asked 2 questions which told Nia she had been paying close attention to everything. The first was about the Donna Callahan phone record and how they had obtained it. David explained. She nodded. The second was the important one. Could they demonstrate a connection between Caldwell's actions on Cypress Avenue and Whitaker's conduct on the bench? Not just a family relationship in a phone record, but a documented pattern of Whitaker providing judicial cover for officers in this network, Patton answered. He spoke for some time from the folder he had brought, citing case numbers and defendants who had filed complaints against Caldwell-connected officers, had those complaints dismissed under Whitaker's oversight, and been prosecuted on Whitaker's bench with outcomes that did not survive independent scrutiny. One of them was Rachel Bloom's brother, whose case Patton had flagged some time ago in a letter to the State Judicial Review Board that had produced no response. Vance looked at Patton for a long moment when he finished. "You have been sitting on this for years," she said. "I've been sitting on it for decades," he said. "I was waiting for something that made it actionable. Yesterday provided that." Vance straightened the documents on the table in front of her, placed her hands flat on top of them. "I'm opening a preliminary inquiry," she said. "All original documentation preserved and transferred through proper chain of custody. Cooperating witness formally processed through witness protection before anything else. Nothing public while the inquiry is active." She looked at Nia. "Nothing." "I understand," Nia said. Vance stood. Then she paused. "Judge-elect Parker Barnes," she said, using the title Nia didn't yet officially hold in a way that felt deliberate. "Your father's name is in several of these files. Elijah Parker, I'm familiar with his work." She picked up her copy of the documents. "He would have found this satisfying." She left the room. Patton sat back. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ceiling. "Now we protect the evidence," he said, "and we wait. And while we wait, we prepare, because what comes next will move fast." The stolen vehicle charge against Nia Parker Barnes was dropped the following morning before David even filed his motion. The precinct's legal liaison called in the tone of someone performing a favor. A clerical error in the vehicle report system, an administrative issue, no admission of wrongdoing. Entirely routine. David thanked the liaison politely and hung up. Then he filed the civil rights lawsuit. The complaint ran dozens of pages. It named Caldwell, Sergeant Powell, the precinct commander, and the city of Harrington. It documented the traffic stop, the false report, the excessive restraint force evidenced by the injuries to Nia's wrists, the denial of timely legal counsel, and most critically, the demonstrated premeditation evidenced by Dana Callahan's phone record showing the false report filed minutes before the stop. That element converted the lawsuit from a misconduct complaint into a conspiracy allegation in the civil system, which moves on its own timeline and cannot be silenced by an administrative dismissal. The lawsuit was filed that morning. Tyler Donovan's footage was released publicly soon afterward, alongside a single statement from David's office that mentioned nothing about the federal inquiry, only that they were pursuing all available legal remedies for the wrongful arrest and civil rights violations suffered by Judge-elect Nia Parker Barnes. By afternoon, the footage had millions of views. Later, a message arrived from Harlan Whitaker's personal attorney, phrased in the careful language of legal correspondence. It contained, underneath the phrasing, a clear and unmistakable suggestion that Nia might want to consider a less aggressive approach to resolution given the professional community she was about to join, and the disruption that the current situation was causing to all parties involved. David read it to Nia word by word. "Forward it to Susan Vance," Nia said, unedited. The message arrived at Vance's office later that afternoon. She called David soon after. "We're moving from preliminary inquiry to full investigation," she said. "The witness intimidation attempt through counsel accelerates our timeline. Subpoenas to the precinct by end of week." She paused. "Tell your client," she said, "that she made the right call." The federal subpoenas arrived at Jackson Street on a Friday morning, and their effect was immediate. Investigators appeared at the records department and requested body camera archives, dispatch logs, and complaint files for a multi-year period. The archives were pulled before anyone could request an administrative review. Several officers were identified through cell records as having coordinated communications with Caldwell on the day of the stop and in the days following. during which their personal devices showed activity consistent with deletion attempts that the forensic team documented before the deletion was complete. Caldwell was suspended the same afternoon. His attorney released a statement calling the stop routine and the investigation politically motivated. The statement was released almost simultaneously with Tyler Donovan's footage passing millions of views, which meant a significant number of people were forming their own opinions about what routine looked like. And the statement was not aging well in the comment sections. Whitaker's chambers were subpoenaed the following week. The emails Rachel Bloom had quietly copied over months, correspondence between Whitaker and the police union president, internal memos discussing complaint handling for specific officers, a thread between Whitaker and the DA about the disposition of cases touching both their jurisdictions, were formally turned over to Vance's office with Rachel present and her attorney beside her. Kevin Franklin lasted days after the subpoenas before his own attorney advised him that cooperation was his best option. He provided records of several cases in which Whitaker had, from the bench, communicated specific expectations about prosecutorial strategy in ways that constituted improper judicial conduct. Those cases, added to the Patton and Parker documentation, gave Vance's team a documented pattern of misconduct covering years across hundreds of cases involving an unknown but significant number of people whose convictions now required independent review. Rachel Bloom's brother was the first name on the review list. Independent counsel examined his case over a weekend. The conviction was vacated soon after. He walked out of the Harrington County Correctional Facility into a cool morning and found his sister waiting at the gate. She held him the way you hold someone you have been trying to get back for a long time. Neither of them said anything for a while. Nia heard about it from David by text. She was in her home office reviewing case files for her first week on the bench. She read the text twice, set the phone face down, sat very still for 1 minute, then she picked it up and texted back. "Tell her I said thank you." The machine, for so long a closed circuit running on loyalty and paperwork and the accumulated protection of years, was being forced open. The documents her father had kept and the documents Patton had kept and the courage of a young courthouse clerk who had written things down in a personal journal for months had accomplished what years of individual complaints and individual lawsuits had not. They had given the federal system enough to hold the entire structure up to the light at once, and the structure could not survive the light. Brian Caldwell was at home on administrative suspension, badge surrendered, awaiting the outcome of the federal inquiry, when 2 men in dark jackets knocked on his door some weeks after the arrest. He opened the door in sweatpants and a department-issued T-shirt, coffee cup in his hand. He had the particular look of a man who has been telling himself for weeks that this is going to work out, that it always works out, that the people he had counted on for protection had protected him before and would protect him now. One of the men showed him a document, federal indictment, multiple counts. Caldwell's face did what faces do when the thing they've been refusing to believe becomes a physical object you can hold. The coffee cup lowered slowly. He read the document. He looked up. "I want to call my attorney," he said. "You can do that at the precinct," the man said. He was processed through Jackson Street, the same precinct, the same intake desk, the same linoleum floors, the same fluorescent lights. Sergeant Powell was on shift. He looked up when Caldwell was brought in, the way he had looked up when Nia was brought in, briefly, without expression. The practiced face of a man who processes people and not situations. But this time he looked a beat longer. His badge was surrendered, formally placed in an evidence bag and sealed in front of him. His service weapon the same. He sat in the processing area in his sweatpants while the paperwork was completed and the officers on shift did what officers do when one of their own is on the wrong side of the desk. They found reasons to be somewhere else. Eyes on screens, voices low, nobody looking. The indictment read, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to file a false police report, conspiracy to intimidate a judicial candidate from assuming public office, civil rights violations. His attorney would spend the next several months attempting to make these charges sound complicated. The footage, the phone record, and Rachel Bloom's testimony would make them very simple. He was led out through the front of the precinct, not the side entrance, not quietly, through the front where the community he had spent years in could see him. The same man who had stood on a sidewalk on Cypress Avenue with his hand near his holster, voice raised for an audience certain of his authority and his protection. The smirk was gone. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in fall. the kind the South occasionally produces as if by apology for the summer. Golden light, the air carrying fallen leaves and something faintly sweet from the row of magnolias along the back fence. The sky was the specific shade of blue that a painter would call impossible and a photographer would call once in a lifetime. The ceremony was in the backyard of her father's house, not a venue, not a hotel. The backyard her grandfather had planted with the oak tree her father had climbed as a child, which now provided shade for folding chairs and a small arch of white flowers that Matthew's sister had assembled that morning with the focused competence of a woman who treats every task as worth doing correctly. The Jaguar was parked under the oak tree. She had retrieved it from the impound lot days after the arrest, driven it home, parked it in the carriage house, and not looked at it for some time. Then, on the morning of the wedding, she had gone to the carriage house early and spent hours polishing it. The same slow circles, starting at the hood, working outward. The scratch on the passenger door was still there, a thin, pale line where Caldwell's handcuff key had caught the panel during the arrest. She had looked at it for a long time. She had run her finger along it. She had decided to leave it. It was part of the car's story now. It was part of her story. You didn't erase the things that had happened to you. You carried them forward, and you let them mean what they meant. Ellis Patton officiated. He stood under the white arch in a dark suit and read the words of the ceremony in his dry, precise baritone. And he looked at Nia and Matthew with the eyes of a man who has seen a great many things over the years and is genuinely grateful for the moments that are good. Rachel Bloom was in the third row. Her brother was beside her, thin and quiet, holding his program card with both hands, looking at everything around him with the careful attention of a man who has been in a concrete room for a long time and is still learning to trust what he's seeing. Tyler Donovan was in the back row. He was wearing a new shirt and had his phone in his jacket pocket, face down and silent. He had filmed an injustice. He was here to witness the other thing. Matthew had written his own vows. She hadn't known they had agreed on traditional language, and when he began, she understood immediately why he had changed his mind. He talked about Elijah Parker. He talked about a man he had never met but had come to know through the files and the car and the things Nia said in her sleep when she was processing something too large for her waking mind. He said he understood now what it meant to carry a legacy forward, not as a weight but as a direction, and he wanted to walk in that direction with her. She cried. She had not expected to. She had not cried since the holding cell and had not allowed it, but this she could not contain and did not try to. She let it happen the way she had let those few minutes happen, fully, without apology. And then she took a breath and said her own vows in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the backyard. And perhaps she allowed herself to believe a little further than that. After the ceremony, when the chairs had been rearranged and the food was out and the evening light had gone from gold to amber, she walked to the Jaguar under the oak tree. She stood beside it and ran her hand along the hood. Matthew appeared behind her and stood close, the warmth of him present without either of them needing to speak. He would have loved this, she said. She meant her father. He did love this, Matthew said. He built the house, he planted the garden, he kept the files. He knew what they were for, even when you didn't. He paused. He was here the whole time. She looked at the scratch on the passenger door. She was going to drive this car to the courthouse on her first day on the bench. She had decided that days after the wedding. On a Tuesday morning soon after, Nia Parker Barnes stood in the Harrington County Superior Court courtroom, Harlan Whitaker's courtroom for years, and prepared to take the oath. The room was full. Her family, colleagues, David, Patton in the front row, Rachel beside him with her brother who was wearing a tie and looking at the ceiling when he first walked in, and then looking at the empty bench for a long time. People from the neighborhood where she had grown up. People from the legal community who had watched her career. People who had seen Tyler Donovan's footage and come to a courthouse on a Tuesday morning because they wanted to be present for what came next. She had been in this courtroom dozens of times as a prosecutor. She had stood at the prosecution table and presented arguments, and watched Whitaker read his rulings from the bench with the unhurried certainty of a man whose authority in this room was absolute, and who knew it. She had always felt the weight of that authority, the way the room was arranged to produce it, the high bench, the angle of the lights, the formal portraits on the wall. She looked at the wall behind the bench. The portrait of Harlan Whitaker was gone. She had submitted that instruction to the court administrator in writing days ago, the first official action she had taken in her capacity as judge-elect. The hook where it had hung for years was empty. The wall behind the bench was bare for now. The presiding judge, Honorable Claire Porter, called the room to order. She asked for Nia Parker Barnes to approach. Nia approached. She placed her left hand on the Bible her father had carried to law school. Matthew was holding it. She had to turn slightly to put her hand on it, and when she turned, she looked at him. He was holding the Bible with both hands and looking at her with the expression she had seen on his face in the backyard of the house on the evening of the wedding. The expression of a man who knows exactly where he is and what it means, and is grateful beyond the reach of language. She raised her right hand. Judge Porter read the oath to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Georgia, to administer justice without respect to persons, to do equal right to the poor and to the rich. She had read these words dozens of times. She knew them by memory, but hearing them aloud in this room, in this moment, with her father's Bible in Matthew's hands, and Patton in the front row, and Rachel beside him, and Rachel's brother, who had walked out of a prison built on the decisions of the man whose chair she was now taking, the words were not familiar. They were a charge. They were a direction. They were an instruction from something larger than this room about what this room was supposed to be. "I do," she said, clear and steady, carrying to the back of the gallery without effort. The room held one beat of silence. Then it began to applaud. She turned to face them. She saw Patton first. He was not applauding. He was nodding, slow and certain, the particular nod of a man who has been waiting a very long time for something and is watching it arrive. She saw Rachel, who was applauding with the specific fervor of someone for whom this moment is personal, in a way they had not fully let themselves feel until it was actually happening. She saw Rachel's brother, looking at the bench with an expression that was doing many things at once and not hiding any of them. She turned to the bench. She sat down in it for the first time. Then she turned to the court administrator, who was standing to the left with a framed document in his hands, waiting as she had instructed for this moment. "Please proceed," she said. He walked to the wall behind the bench and hung the frame where Whitaker's portrait had been. He centered it, leveled it, and stepped back. A framed copy of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." The words her father had quoted to her when she was young. The words she had asked him why the law didn't do what it said. The words he had told her. The law was not the problem. The law was precise and clear. The people responsible for applying it were the problem, and the solution was to become one of those people and apply it correctly. The room was quiet. Then the gallery rose. The consequences arrived in the deliberate institutional sequence of a system working correctly. Not fast, not dramatic, but irreversible. Brian Caldwell was indicted on multiple federal counts. He was terminated from the Harrington Police Department the morning the indictment was unsealed, badge and service weapon collected at the door by the new precinct commander. His attorney spent months attempting to make the charges sound complicated. The footage, the phone record, and Rachel's testimony made them simple. He accepted a plea agreement sometime after the arrest. Federal sentencing guidelines for his charges meant years in prison. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. The same restraints, the same loss of freedom he had decided to impose on a woman in a silk dress on a sunny afternoon on a public street. The irony was precise and final. Dana Callahan pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and conspiracy charges, years of supervised probation, a permanent bar from any law enforcement adjacent activity. She had believed her father would make it disappear. She had understood correctly how things had worked for years. She had not accounted for the filing cabinet. Harlan Whitaker was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. Vance made the strategic decision not to charge him criminally. The evidence, while substantial, would produce a difficult trial. The consequences she chose instead were permanent. His pension was revoked following the Judicial Conduct Review Board's formal finding of misconduct across years and hundreds of cases. His portrait had already come off the wall of Courtroom 3 before the finding was issued. His name was removed from the ceremonial alumni list of the Harrington County Bar Association. He gave no public statement. His attorney released 2 sentences. He moved out of Harrington some months after the investigation concluded, quietly and without announcement. a man who had been the most powerful person in the county's legal system and was now someone people mentioned in the past tense in courthouse corridors. Several officers in Caldwell's network were charged with evidence tampering and conspiracy. Plea agreements terminated their convictions under federal supervision. The precinct was restructured under a consent decree. Independent oversight of all use of force complaints, mandatory body camera retention without internal deletion authority, quarterly civilian review board reporting. The ordinance establishing the review board passed overwhelmingly. The dissenting vote did not run for re-election. Kevin Franklin, the DA, did not seek another term. His cooperation kept him out of federal court, but the testimony it required against people he had worked beside for years became public, and his political career ended as a practical matter. His successor was a woman who had spent years as a public defender. The independent case review Nia had requested examined dozens of cases from Whitaker's courtroom involving testimony from network-connected officers. Multiple convictions were vacated or sentences reduced. Rachel's brother was the first. He enrolled at the community college on the east side of Harrington and was studying paralegal studies. He wanted to understand the thing that had been used against him. Tyler Donovan's footage ended the year with millions of views. He declined several television interviews. He said the footage was the thing that mattered, not him, and he'd rather let it be the story. He was young and already understood something that takes most journalists much longer to learn. Brian Caldwell's handcuffs were the last authority he ever held. The moment he put them on, Nia Parker Barnes's wrists one sunny afternoon on Cypress Avenue, too tight on purpose, on a public street in front of a dozen recording phones, he set in motion every consequence that followed. Not because she was powerful, not because the system responded the way it should have responded to every person he had done this to before, but because this time the woman in the handcuffs had a locked filing cabinet full of decades of documentation. A civil rights attorney who answered on the first ring, a retired judge with years of parallel records, and a young courthouse clerk who had been writing things down in a private journal for months and was waiting for someone she could trust to give them to. And because she gave herself a few minutes to feel what it felt like. And then she went to work. Elijah Parker never got to see the courtroom he had spent his career trying to change. He spent decades filing cases, writing briefs, and documenting every instance of corruption he encountered in a metal cabinet in his study, and he died before any of it was used for what he had kept it for. But he left his daughter the car and the files and the specific quality of attention that knows the difference between what the law says and what the law does, and more importantly, what you are obligated to do about that gap. He told her the law was a weapon. She became the person who decides how it is wielded in the room he had always wanted to reach. In the chair, no one who looked like him had been allowed to sit in until she sat down. The scratch on the Jaguar's door is still there. She drives it to the courthouse every Monday morning, the long way past the curb on Cypress Avenue where it happened. She doesn't slow down anymore. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel. We have more stories like this one coming. Don't miss them. In the quiet aftermath of unimaginable humiliation, when a woman in a cream silk dress feels cold steel bite into her wrists on a sunny Georgia street, something profound shifts inside her. Nia Parker Barnes could have let the moment break her. The smirk of a corrupt officer, the false report meant to intimidate, the machine that had protected its own for decades. Instead, she gave herself a few precious minutes in that holding cell to feel every raw edge of the pain. The sting of being treated like a criminal in her father's cherished Jaguar, the weight of a system built to silence people who looked like her. She let the tears come, the shame wash over her, and then she rose with a clarity sharper than any blade. That is the lesson this story burns into your heart. True power isn't pretending the hurt doesn't exist. It's staring injustice square in the face, feeling its full force without apology, and then choosing, deliberately, fiercely, to turn that fire into fuel. Nia didn't just survive the moment. She carried her father's locked files like a torch, leaned on the steady love of her fiancé Matthew, and stood shoulder to shoulder with elders like Judge Ellis Patton and a brave young clerk named Rachel Bloom. Together they dismantled decades of hidden corruption, not with rage alone, but with documented truth, quiet courage, and an unbreakable belief that the law could finally be what her father always said it should be, a weapon for justice in the right hands. The scratch on the Jaguar's door remains to this day, a visible reminder that scars don't disappear, but they become part of the beautiful story of who you become. If this tale of resilience and legacy stirred something deep inside you, tell me in the comments. What moment in your own life taught you to feel it fully and then move forward with purpose? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if it moved you, share it with someone who needs this reminder today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that light the way through the darkest hours. We have more waiting for you.